BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Wednesday, another Ripper Wednesday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Wednesdays, I talk to you guys about Jack the Ripper, perhaps the world's most famous unsolved mystery. And in this episode, I will be discussing Jack the Ripper's From Hell letter, responding to challenge questions from the Rippercast, and looking at the new video on the pub test that explores the trial of Charles Lechmere. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about Jack the Ripper. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Box Ned. Now, some of you might recall that recently on Ripper Wednesday, I made an episode called Jack the Ripper's Love Letter, Dear Boss, and that was because I was discussing a book called Jack the Ripper, A True Love Story by Win Weston Davies, and he also has a chapter on the From Hell letter, which is arguably more famous than the Dear Boss letter, or some people might think the Dear Boss letter is more famous than the From Hell letter. But I've discussed this book quite a lot here on Ripper Wednesday. It is now the month of November, and I received this book, Jack the Ripper, A True Love Story, as a Christmas gift last year. That would be in December, and I think I did the first episode on it on December 26th, and I've finally now made it to the end. I used to say that I'm a very slow reader, and I always read 6 or 7 books at the same time. That's why I never finish any of them. But as the years go by, I've actually become rather good at finishing the books. It just takes me a very long time, and I also do very small segments for them here on Black Box Online Radio. In 2019, I first tried to read a book while discussing it for the YouTube channel, and I thought, hey, this will be a very interesting way to explore content, and it'll be an interesting way for me to stay focused on the book, and in an entire episode once, I made it through 2 pages, so I realized that that would be a very slow process, reading the book directly on the air. But Jack the Ripper, A True Love Story by Win Weston Davies is a book that I've talked about a lot. I made an episode about the murder of Mary Kelly called Stories and Legends here on BBOR. I also used this book when I did the episode on the double event, as well as looking at the suspect of Win Weston Davies, Francis Spurzheim Craig. But let's see what he has to say about Jack the Ripper's From Hell letter. By October 3rd, the double event had become the main story in newspapers worldwide. Reporters booked passages to London from all parts of the globe, and telegraph wires were hot with syndicated stories sent out by the agencies. No one doubted the Ripper would strike again and soon. As thirst for this news became insatiable, so seemingly did the Metropolitan Police become more obdurate in their refusal to cooperate with reporters. It became a war in which the world's press pillared the police. In return, the police refused to allow reporters to have access to the murder sites or view the bodies in the mortuaries. And this is something that Win Weston Davies will really zone in on in his book, Jack the Ripper, A True Love Story, about how there is this type of war that's going on between the police and the media, and it's almost as if there is going to be a lot less communication that's happening between these two entities because they're trying to seal things off. And then the media is going to start reporting that the police are actually being very close-minded, that the police are not cooperating, and also that the police are not capturing the killer. Now, that final statement, I completely agree with. I mean, Jack the Ripper has not been identified to everyone's satisfaction, but it appears that not everyone was in total agreement on how things should have been done back in 1888. And there, you may have also noticed something about the wires going out around the world. Other things that will have brought up by Win Weston Davies is that people from the entire world were coming to London. He even brings up a big quotation from the Boston Globe talking about the From Hell letter and Jack the Ripper's activities, and much as people expected, the Ripper did strike again. We have the murder of Polly Nichols on August 31st, the murder of Annie Chapman on September 8th. Then we have the Dear Boss letter that is dated on September 27th of 1888. Then there is the double event on September 30th, the Saucy Jackie postcard, and in mid-October we have the From Hell letter. And after the From Hell letter, we of course have the murder of Mary Kelly on November 9th. And I'm going to just look at this section here on the From Hell letter. The letter, too, has been subjected to microscopic analysis over the years. The crude handwriting looked nothing like the neat script of the Dear Boss letter, but since the wording appears to have been none too successful to portray the author as an illiterate and possibly Irish, it could have been a deliberate ruse. The From Hell letter reads, From Hell, Mr. Lusk, sore. I send you half the kidney I took from the woman, preserved it for you. T'other piece I fried and ate it. It was very nice. I may send you the bloody knife that took it out, if you only wait a while longer. Signed, Catch Me When You Can, Mr. Lusk. Now, Win-Weston Davies' first response to this is in regards to these misspellings, and it says, Too many others have pointed to the misspellings of knife and while, and they are far from convincing, as well as the inconsistency of Mr. and Mr. to require any further detailed analysis here. And oh, whoa, I was thinking, wait a second, now why on earth would you say no further analysis? What he's talking about is, in the From Hell letter, it says, I may send you the bloody knife, but knife is spelled K-N-I-F. That took it out if you only wait a while longer, but while is spelled W-H-I-L. In both of these instances, somebody has dropped the final E. And is this the action or activity of a hoaxer, or is this someone who genuinely made that mistake regularly? If anything, that's a commonality, that this person is dropping the final E, but they didn't do that when they wrote out the word peace. T'other piece I fried and ate it. They also didn't drop the final E with the word ate. And I'm just going to read the next sentence here for you. It is fairly clear, whoever the author was, it was a deliberate attempt to make it appear to have come from a semi-literate and probably Irish source. So it seems like Win-Weston Davies is of the mindset that the From Hell letter was a hoax, and he will talk about this later on in his chapter about how he believes that this may have been a prank that was orchestrated by a medical student, and it was written by someone who was perhaps English, but trying to make it sound like it was phonetically Irish, or someone's trying to copy the Irish accent. And, I mean, he is completely right, though, about the inconsistency in the misspelling. For example, we have From Hell, Mr. Lusk, but then it's signed Mr. Lusk at the end. But what is left out is that the word Mr. isn't spelled out at the beginning. There is only the abbreviation. So I don't know how you could say that somebody couldn't spell the word Mr., or that this has any sort of awakening or shining any light on the person's ability to spell English properly. If he's using the abbreviation once, but he signed at Mr. Lusk at the end, that really could be interpreted either way. And this is one thing that really is very unclear, and that is whether or not these misspellings actually came from somebody who couldn't write English. I mean, these people are all saying that it could be someone who was of Irish descent, but you guys all know that one of the most widely discussed theories in the world of Jack the Ripper is that this was coming from someone who was of East European descent, someone who was maybe from Poland or Russia, maybe even someone who was Jewish and had Yiddish as their first language. So there are numerous possibilities as to why these misspellings could have been created. But ultimately, Win-Weston Davies has a suspect named Francis Spurzheim Craig, who was English, and he believes that an English person was Jack the Ripper. So it seems like he's leading toward this being a prank where somebody is trying to pass themselves off as Irish, but it was actually done by a medical student. And ultimately, Win-Weston Davies took a very different stance with the Dear Boss letter. He said that he cannot determine whether or not that was someone who was a prankster or hoaxer, but most likely, he was someone who had a journalistic background, and you can hear more about that in my episode, Dear Boss, Jack the Ripper's Love Letter, here on BBOR, and I also talk about other subjects on Black Box Online Radio, such as the Zodiac Killer, The Black Dahlia, The Disappearance of Maura Murray, and D.B. Cooper. And one more time, you can hit the like button and subscribe. And this is a book, though, that really goes into a lot of detail about different aspects of the Ripper case. And in the From Hell chapter, it also talks about some of the observations that were made by members of law enforcement, as well as the Dr. Thomas Openshaw, who examined the kidney that we were just discussing. Let's have a read. In general, the city police seem to have been better disposed towards the gentlemen of the press, and as a consequence, one of far less criticism than the increasingly unpopular Sir Charles Warren and the Mets, as well as the saturation of the East End by police that were dividing all over London. Local residents were, by this time, taking part in an attempt to track down the Ripper. Several local vigilante groups sprung up, and the best one that was known was the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee that was formed on September 10th of 1888. George Lusk, a local builder and repairer of music halls, was elected president. He seems to have been a man of self-importance and soon drew attention to himself by writing letters to national newspapers. He then asked for police protection for himself and his family because he became convinced that his house in Mile End was being watched by a bearded stranger. If it was, the man was never apprehended or identified. And George Lusk, of course, would become the recipient of the From Hell letter. And I think that this is very interesting because the Dear Boss letter and the Saucy Jackie postcard were sent to the Central News Agency, whereas the From Hell letter is not sent to a member of law enforcement. It's not sent to a newspaper. It's not sent to the Central News Agency. It's not sent to any of the people that have been previously discussed. The From Hell letter was sent to the chairman of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. So this is another thing that is drastically different. And you guys who follow Black Box Online Radio know that I'm of the mindset that the Dear Boss letter and the From Hell letter were written by different people. I think the Dear Boss letter and the Saucy Jackie postcard were written by the same person, and the From Hell letter was written by a different author. I'm of the belief now that the Dear Boss letter and the Saucy Jackie postcard were hoaxes. The From Hell letter I'm still mostly divided on, and that really heavily relates to having the kidney here. And one of the doctors that examined the kidney was Dr. Thomas Openshaw, and there's a section here about him in the From Hell chapter. There are several versions of Dr. Thomas Openshaw's reaction. Some reports have him declaring that it was the left kidney of a 45-year-old woman, but others, more probably and more accurate reports, give a much more considered and circumspect reply. Openshaw was an experienced histopathologist, would have been well aware that it is totally impossible to tell from microscopic appearances the sex of a kidney, and the age could only be guessed in the broadest of terms. Moreover, unlike the liver, the alcohol, whether or not this person drank gin or not, leaves no stigmata on the kidney. And he was, however, able to give several valuable pieces of information. Firstly, the kidney that was sent with the From Hell letter had been preserved in spirits of wine within a short time of being harvested. This was the medical term for rectified ethyl alcohol, which was an unusual preservative for human tissues at the time. Most hospitals and dissecting rooms used formaldehyde for this purpose, and this left a pungent and unmistakable odor on anything with which it came into contact with. Spirits of wine could, however, easily be purchased at any pharmacy, and the term could even be used to mean ethyl-based spirits such as gin or brandy. So these are the things that have been shared, and as I understand, what Win Weston Davies is talking about is Dr. Thomas Openshaw was quoted as saying that, this is the kidney of a mid-40s woman who was having a drinking problem, who had Bright's disease, and the renal artery matched up to the kidney of Catherine Eddowes. And it appears that Dr. Thomas Openshaw wanted to come forward and say, no, I didn't actually say those things. Those are misquotes. Those are things that have been attributed to me that I don't actually stand by. And as I said in the previous episode, Win Weston Davies is a medical doctor, but he doesn't brag about it openly in the book. He says words like histopathologist, but I only gathered that from reading articles about him where he's referred to as Dr. Win Weston Davies, and he's listed as a surgeon. In his own book, Jack the Ripper, A True Love Story, he doesn't dwell heavily on his own medical expertise. Or let me be clear. When he does talk about things, he does dwell on his medical expertise, but he's not just saying, "Hey, I'm a medical doctor. This is the lowdown. Hey, I'm a medical doctor. Here are the facts." And I think that's a really interesting choice because some people who are coming at this from a medical perspective cannot stop talking about their medical education, and he's doing it very, very discreetly. I just think that it's an interesting choice. But overall, this is the book, Jack the Ripper, A True Love Story. Now, he's of the belief that a journalist wrote the Dear Boss letter and Saucy Jackie postcard, and the From Hell letter was most likely a hoax. What do you think? Please put your ideas in the comment section down below. I would love to read them, and if you have any additional comments about Thomas Openshaw, if you have any additional comments about the kidney being preserved in an alcohol, spirits, of wine, as opposed to formaldehyde, I would love to read your comments. And also, I want to talk about the different types of Jack the Ripper books that are out there now, because, as some of you may know, there are 3 books that I've been discussing with you guys recently. One of them is Jack the Ripper, A True Love Story by Win Weston Davies. And another one is Jack the Ripper and the East End, which is written by various writers, one of which is Peter Ackroyd. And then there is Jack the Ripper, The Terrible Legacy by the Whitechapel Society. And these books all explore very different aspects of the Ripper case. And this will bring us to the challenge question portion of today's Ripper Wednesday. And as many of you know, I follow the Rippercast. It's a podcast dedicated to Jack the Ripper and the Whitechapel murders. And they had a guest on named Stan Russo, who is the author of the book, The Jack the Ripper Suspects. And he was talking about a conversation that he had with Frog Moody about publicizing the Jack the Ripper story, about promoting the Jack the Ripper story, and gaining a certain amount of attention with the general public. And what he means by that is Frog Moody made the statement that any attention on the Ripper case at all is valuable. Any movie, any fictitious novel, even things like Jack the Ripper the Musical are valuable because they get more people interested in the Ripper case, they get more people interested in the mystery, they get more eyes on the subject, and when the subject becomes more popular, more people will be looking at it, and there's a higher chance that somebody will actually solve the case. And I would love to know your response to that. Stan Russo took the stance that no, that is absolutely false. There could be a lot of things out there that would be distractions, that would have bad information, and also people might be abusing and misusing the content, making light of the suffering of the victims, insulting the victims, and just absolutely saying untrue things about the people who were directly affected by this. And even though these crimes happened in 1888, I definitely think that there's a certain degree of truth to that, and I would side with Stan Russo mostly over Frog Moody on that particular issue, and I would love to know your responses. But I think there is something that is so much worse than movies, something that is so much worse than novels, something that is so much worse than Jack the Ripper the Musical. And yes, there are multiple musicals about Jack the Ripper, and this would be when people are putting out true crime theories like about how they believe that the Jack the Ripper murders were committed by a satanic underworld that's connected to the royal family, and talking about Jack the Ripper's Bible and New Testament and all of this dark magic stuff. When people are presenting those things as real true crime theories, those become distractions. Because if I can be 100% honest with you, I think they're mostly untrue. I don't think they're going to go anywhere. Would I talk about them? Yes. Because number one, you have to leave no stone unturned. And when I started this channel, I said something that I might regret. And that is that if somebody has written a book, I'll talk about it. If somebody has put forward a presentation, I'll respond to it. But are they distractions? To a certain degree, but that's ultimately what you do. Like when someone is pushing the Jack the Ripper black magic angle, the satanic and occult connections, mostly you just say, no, I don't think it's true. I think it's a distraction. This person is just a little too hyped up on their own emotions, and then you close the door on that subject, you close the book, and it can go back on the shelf. And if somebody wants to read it in another 137 years, They have every right to. But I'm also fully aware that we do have the right to share ideas, we do have the right to have communication and discussions, and even if I don't agree with somebody's approach to this, they still have the right to create their own book and share their findings. But with that being said, if anybody were to put out a book about some type of black magic rituals connected to the Jack the Ripper case, and they're doing it just for attention, if they don't actually believe their theory, that would be fraudulent. And I've encountered this maybe once or twice on Black Box Online Radio, where you're seeing somebody who might not genuinely believe what they're saying, they're just putting it out there to get a reaction from people, and that's fraudulent behavior. But the books that I've been discussing recently on Ripper Wednesday have been Jack the Ripper in the East End and Jack the Ripper, The Terrible Legacy. They're both books that are written by multiple authors put together. And I'm at the point where I would say that these books are 60% valuable, 40% not valuable. And I'm saying that because Jack the Ripper in the East End is meant to be a history book. It's meant to tell the history of the East End and the geography of London's East End, but it really isn't very much Ripper-related. You might find facts and information that could be valuable in there, and I learned about it because Paul Begg appeared on the Rippercast, and he said that that's the book that's a scam. It has nothing to do with Jack the Ripper, it's only about the East End, and I determined that it was 20% Ripper-related, 80% East End-related, so it's a little bit about Jack the Ripper, but it's going to provide facts and information that might be valuable. Sure. But last week on Ripper Wednesday, I was talking about the book Jack the Ripper, The Terrible Legacy, and I was going through a chapter that was discussing some of the commentaries on Frederick George Aberline, an inspector on the case that has been popularized in film. He was played by Johnny Depp in the From Hell movie. And in that story, in that instance, that is a very opinionated stance. Someone is giving their take on the subject. They're sharing their own personal responses to how Frederick George Aberline has been portrayed by not only the media, but also by history books, and they have every right to do that, and it is Ripper-related. Jack the Ripper, The Terrible Legacy, that's the focus of the book, but does that bring us answers? Will exploring these types of materials bring answers? I'm like 60% valuable, 40% not valuable, because they're definitely giving commentary and opinions, but I don't necessarily know if they are going to evaluate the facts in the most beneficial way to people who are reading those books. If you're looking for that as some way of gaining this new and wonderful insight into the world of Jack the Ripper, I think that it's 60% worth your time, 40% maybe not. Let me know what you think about any of that, and if you've heard the recent Ripper Wednesday episodes that I've done on Jack the Ripper, The East End, and Jack the Ripper, The Terrible Legacy, I would love to know your responses, and you can always just drop anything you want in the comments section down below. And to the credit of somebody like Win Weston Davies, he wrote a book called Jack the Ripper, A True Love Story, which is about his Jack the Ripper suspect, Francis Spurzheim Craig, and it's exactly what you would expect from a Jack the Ripper book. He says, this is my theory, this is my suspect, this is what I think happened. He has a chapter on each of the victims. He has a chapter on the Dear Boss letter and the Saucy Jackie postcard. He has a chapter on the From Hell letter, and he gives his conclusion. Do I agree with any of his observations? About the letters, totally decent. Do I think that his suspect, Francis Spurzheim Craig, was Jack the Ripper? No. Why not? Because he believes that Mary Kelly, the final victim of Jack the Ripper, was really a woman named Elizabeth Davies. He's Win Weston Davies, she's Elizabeth Davies. He claims that he is her great-nephew, and that Elizabeth Davies married Francis Spurzheim Craig and became Elizabeth Craig. And when Mary Kelly died, she was murdered by Jack the Ripper on November 9th, of 1888. 1888 has a lot of 8s in it, so I'm thinking about the number 8. Mary Kelly was murdered on November 9th of 1888, and then she was buried. And Win Weston Davies was proposing that they exhume the body of Mary Kelly and try to get DNA, and he wanted to do a DNA test to prove that he was her great-nephew. And I was just thinking, at that point, let Mary Kelly rest in peace. Most likely, he's not her great-nephew, and just to exhume somebody's body for that purpose alone, not to prove that Francis Craig was Jack the Ripper, but just to prove this familial connection between Win Weston Davies and Mary Kelly, I didn't really think that there was enough justification for that. And also, probability is not going to be on his side, because what I said in my episode about his Mary Kelly theory is it's just a house of cards. If it turns out that Mary Kelly's name wasn't really Elizabeth Davies and she wasn't really the wife of Francis Craig, his whole motive falls apart. It's a very flimsy theory. But in terms of creating his book, Jack the Ripper, A True Love Story, he did everything that you would expect from a Jack the Ripper book. He's talking about the Ripper case. He's telling everyone what he thinks about it, who he thinks Jack the Ripper was, what he thinks about the letters. That's good. That's fair. I absolutely disagree with his conclusions, but we have every right to. Maybe you disagree with his conclusions as well. When you have books like Jack the Ripper, The Terrible Legacy, and Jack the Ripper in the East End, these things are more on the peripheral, where they are related to Jack the Ripper, but they're just giving commentary about a very, very loosely connected thing, like the geography of the East End, or talking about how an inspector from the Ripper case is portrayed in the media. And people have the right to put that stuff out there, but I don't necessarily think all students of the Ripper case are looking for those specific materials. Let me know what you think about anything in regards to Jack the Ripper books, theories, as well as other forms of media like novels, movies, Jack the Ripper the musical. Share anything you want in the comments section down below. I would love to read it. And I told you guys that there's a new video on the channel The Pub Test, which is run by Owen, and he does a great job over there. And he released a new video about the Jack the Ripper suspect Charles Lechmere. And it's called The Trial of Charles Lechmere. And this is one that I simply could not resist, because, you know, he's putting a Jack the Ripper suspect on trial. And what Owen did in this video was, he is playing two roles. One role is that of the prosecutor, and one as the defense attorney. And I think it's brilliant. I think it's amazing. I think it's excellent. Because he's talking about the interpretations of the evidence that would indicate that Charles Lechmere was guilty of being Jack the Ripper, and the evidence against him. But in a court of law, remember, this isn't only about whether or not someone actually did it. This is about creating reasonable doubt. And if there's any reasonable doubt, you should say this person would be found not guilty. In part one of his video series, he was talking about the murder in Bucks Row, the murder of Polly Nichols on August 31st of 1888. And he's going to do a multi-part series on the trial of Charles Lechmere. And with part one, when he was in the role of the defense attorney, he said something that was very bold to me. What really stood out was, people can make the case that Charles Lechmere has a connection to all of these different locations in Whitechapel, like it's not only on his walking path to work with Bucks Row and the murder of Polly Nichols. I mean, you could easily say that he has connections to other places, like his mother's home was near where Liz Stride was murdered and so on. And he has connections to various parts of the city that are Ripper related and even Thames Torso related. But the more important thing is, thousands of people in Whitechapel had those connections. Thousands of people had connections to the crime scenes. Thousands of people walked the streets of Whitechapel. And the only thing that indicates is that there is opportunity and circumstance. But other people had those opportunities. And I was like, yeah, okay, I hear you completely. The prosecution challenges, fair enough. But thousands of people weren't in Bucks Row on the night of August 31st, 1888. Or let's be clear, it was dark out, but it was the early morning hours of August 31st, 1888. Thousands of people weren't out there. How many people were in Bucks Row? 3. Charles Lechmere, Robert Paul, and Polly Nichols, the victim, who was deceased. And he can be placed at the scene of the crime, at the time that the murder committed, and he was found there alone by Robert Paul. That is something that is worthy of consideration. I have said this from the very start about Charles Lechmere. But if we're talking about a trial, do I have reasonable doubts? Yes. Why? Because of everything the defense attorney laid out. This would be something that could easily be explained by somebody who's walking to work, who sees a body, and then he is just not sure what to do, so he's lingering around for a little bit. He sees Robert Paul and he flags him down. Charles Lechmere could very well be innocent. And if I had to make a determination right now based on the Bucks Row story, I would say that I have reasonable doubts. easily somebody else could have committed the murder. Someone could have murdered Polly Nichols. They heard Lechmere coming, so they ran through the woods buildings unseen. Win Weston Davies also goes into great detail about this in his book, Jack the Ripper, A True Love Story, when he says that it just seems like the Ripper is just disappearing. The police can't catch the Ripper because as soon as they get to the crime scenes, the Ripper is gone and nowhere to be found, and it's so much beyond that. Unless your suspect is Charles Lechmere, we know exactly what Lechmere was doing on August 31st of 1888. His walking paths are pretty well documented. But if your suspect is anybody else like Aaron Kosminski or David Cohen, then mostly they committed the crimes, they snuck away, and the authorities had nothing to go on. They didn't get caught. The media comes in, hey, where's the Ripper? Hey, you guys back off. And then there is this giant turf war. But ultimately, whose side are you really on? Whose side are you really on? Do you think that Charles Lechmere was just a victim of circumstance? Or do you think that he was Jack the Ripper? Do you think all of these things about his geographic connections and geographic profiling have credence and value? Or was he just a Whitechapel worker who's trying to go push some carts of meat and he happened to find a dead body? Which one of those would you really like to hear? And I would really like to watch more of Owen's video series. Again, only the first episode is out, part 1 of the trial of Charles Lechmere. And I'm really curious what he's going to say about the other crimes, because I've noticed that almost all of these Charles Lechmere discussions center on Bucks Row, on the murder of Polly Nichols, but that's just one crime. Jack the Ripper committed at least 4 other murders, in my opinion. Some people don't believe that the Ripper murdered Liz Stride. Some people don't believe that the Ripper murdered Mary Kelly. But as of now, I would say 1 person, 5 murders. And I would also just really like to know what you guys think. Share anything you want in the comments section down below. Which side do you agree with? And please let me know what you think about the From Hell letter. Let me know what you think about the different types of Jack the Ripper media is out there. You can even respond to the challenge question if you want. Is any form of Ripper-related content valuable because it gets more eyes on the case? I would love to know your responses there. And of course, what do you think about Charles Lechmere as a suspect? And I might bring back the book, Jack the Ripper, A True Love Story from time to time, but mostly in terms of standalone episodes, I think that I've reached the end of it. I mean, I've gone through absolutely everything, the suspect profile, the letters, and also the stories of Mary Kelly, the introductory segments, and I actually did that on December 26th of last year, so I do get started on the books very early on. Do I finish them very early on? No. It only takes me like 11 months to make it through a single book, but that's what happens when you read slowly. Okay, thank you so much for listening to this week's Ripper Wednesday. And tomorrow, to all of you who follow the Zodiac Killer mystery and the Black Dahlia mystery, I will hopefully do a live stream. I can't guarantee everything because there are going to be a couple iffy issues going on with that, but I would hopefully be doing a live stream on the Zodiac Black Dahlia connection. If not, there will be a Zodiac Black Dahlia pre-recorded segment that will come out. But you can always hit the like button and subscribe one more time. Follow along with these discussions about the Zodiac Killer, the Black Dahlia, and of course Jack the Ripper. You guys know where to write the show, blackboxonlineradio@AOL.com. And you can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook name is Ned DeHaan. And there is also blackboxned88 on Instagram, as well as the Black Box Online Radio Facebook page. This show is available for free downloads anywhere you get your podcasts, including Black Box Podcast and Black Box True Crime on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. And you can also get the images that you see going by on the screen available at True Crime Designs on Facebook. True Crime Designs. And I release shorts and reels Monday through Friday on the mentioned Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube profiles. And if you want to support all of these efforts, you can go over to buymeacoffee.com. buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88, and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And I'll talk to you guys soon, and please tune in next Wednesday for a new episode about Jack the Ripper. Until next time.